our first panel of the season. It's New York Fashion Week and we're going to be talking about the Jason Wu show, so it's a fantastic show to start with, but I've also got a fantastic panel who I will let introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do.
So I'm Alex Fullerton and I'm the fashion director of Stylist magazine.
I'm Alex Fury, I'm the fashion editor of The Independent.
And I'm Tom Ryling, a London artist and designer and the online editor at Love.
So let's start by talking a little bit about New York Fashion Week. What are we excited to see? Is Jason Wu a highlight for you guys? Alexandra, what are you looking forward to?
I'm probably more excited by the end of the week, Mark Jacobs' show, which is always kind of the start. It feels like the start of the whole of the sort of set of fashion weeks. But Jason Wu is really important to American design, so it's going to be quite exciting to see it. It's always like a bit of a buzz at the start of the season.
I'm excited, I'm interested that you say, it's very important to American design, because Susie Menkes published an interview that she did with Jason Wu today, and she talked about him as being a beacon for a generation of uptown designers, and it got me thinking a bit about what Jason Wu's identity as part of New York Fashion Week is and what he tells us about what's going on in New York. Alex, where would you place him?
I mean, he's sort of a young Oscar de la Renta. He makes quite polite, well-behaved clothes. It's not really about rebellion, it's about dressing lots of very rich women, which is sort of what fashion is about.
Which is what you love.
It's what a lot of fashion is about. And I also think it's, he's never made a play for that kind of market. He's never tried to be edgy or, uptown, down. He's never tried to be downtown. He's always very aware that he's dressing kind of refined. And also that he's often dressing refined ladies of a certain age. I think there's a lot of awareness of his customer, which is very interesting, especially for a designer that's really young. I don't even think he's 30 yet.
He's just turned 30, I think, yeah. Tom, what's your take on that? Because obviously I think to a lot of people in London, that's what they see pretty much all of New York as, not particularly edgy, not particularly exciting, but then this season there has been a little bit of talk of some of the younger brands coming on, Creatures of the Wind's got quite a lot of buzz. How do you see someone like Jason Wu, and what's your take on New York in terms of young creatives working there?
I think speaking from London, there's obviously this complete contrast. I think London's always in a place where if you're 19 and you just want to make something really cool, someone's going to say yeah and maybe champion you a bit. And I think in New York that seems to be harder to do. So you've got Wu and Wang and people who have done it, except they're not just making cool little t-shirts, they're making gowns, or they're putting together a whole business plan, and it's very corporate and very money, and they know how to play that game, and that's a really great game if you can play it. It's about, with Wu I see he's aiming for a kind of a legacy already at 30 years old, which is kind of amazing. He's in it for the long run.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned that, because it's been a really exciting time for him, obviously that's part of the reason we wanted to cover his show with the panel, because he's just had the appointment at Hugo Boss, he's been made the creative director of their women's wear, and he's got this beauty collection coming out with Lancome. What do you think of, as Alex said, he's just turned 30. We don't really see that in London, of young designers building a brand so aggressively. Is it impressive?
It's impressive if you're interested in the relationship between fashion and money. As a kind of sort of menswear designer, I'm not particularly interested in that relationship, but I can understand why that's attractive and why that's interesting to someone to think about how their art can make them loads of cash, and how that is in itself, an art. Yeah, it's a different thing. And lots of my contemporaries in London, I think, we all dream of buying the big house or be given, the big job at Hugo Boss, but it's not why you wake up every day, and it's not why you go to your studio every day. And I'm not saying that maybe is why what he does every day, but I would imagine it's somewhere in his head.
Alex. So, this is Alex number 1, Alex number 2.
And I can't even call us Alex F, because we're both Alex F.
Oh God, yeah, this is impossible. Alex Fury. Would London be in better stead if more young designers approached fashion in the way Jason Wu does?
Well, I think saying would London be in better stead implies that London isn't in a fantastic place, which it is. And also, I think the interesting thing with someone like Jason Wu is that he's very aware of selling clothes. It is commercial, but also I think in London you have designers that are plugged into that same sort of thing and are building businesses. I think there is this whole idea of kind of home magazines and home markets supporting their own designers. And I think in New York, the fact the country is so big and there are so many department stores and there are so many very rich people there, is a way that designers can build those businesses so quickly. I think it's I don't want to say it's a captive market, but I think a lot of Americans will look to buy American. And also they have, you know, they've got Michelle Obama wearing American designers and then immediately whatever she wears sells out. So I think there is that kind of, I don't think it's that the designers are less commercial. I don't think it's that they're less business minded in London. I think for a lot of them it's not the emphasis, but also equally I think that the market is much smaller.
That's interesting. I'm interested in his position as kind of a luxury brand, because we've talked about that a bit. You know, he's selling to a certain type of women. As working somewhere like Stylist and working at The Independent, what would you say your readers' knowledge of Jason Wu is? Because obviously it sits alongside, you know, very high-end brands that have a huge heritage, but Jason's brand's only been around for 7 years. Would you say your readers are excited by Jason Wu? Would you shoot Jason Wu? Would you feature it? Is it something they're engaged with?
I think that I would probably try to focus more on British brands, and that's what I do. And it depends on what is available, and it is available in a lot fewer department stores here. Whereas if you've got it in the States, you've got it, and I don't know, in every state. There's a big store in a big city where there are all these rich women, and I'm like, where does all their money come from? How are they so rich? And whereas outside of London here, you've got Manchester or kind of Cheshire or Scotland, but there isn't that kind of strength financially. So I think the dresses are very beautiful, but there are a lot of other people that I would want to consider for shoots and coverage beforehand. And our readers don't really care about what celebrities are wearing at all. Michelle Obama isn't a celebrity as in a kind of a naff C-lister name, and you wouldn't really want to do a get the look on her, but they'd know about him from maybe seeing, I don't know, a news report in a newspaper, if you would say she wore.
See, I think maybe it's for a general audience, maybe he is better known than we might give him credit for, because I do think certainly in America, because people are very aware of what Michelle Obama is wearing, and she's worn him at the inauguration ball twice, I think. Which is, and I've spoken with him about it, and he said that, you know, the impact that had on his business was incredible, and the impact it had on his recognition that he gets into taxis and taxi drivers know who he is, which is quite amazing, and which you kind of don't think would happen here with Christopher Kane. But then I wonder,
getting into a cab then.
But then I think it's again, it's that weird thing of people being very aware of it. I think probably more people know Christopher Kane's name as well, but Jason's also very good at marketing himself, you know, at placing himself, at doing the right pieces of press. And that's all part of building a brand, and he's done it incredibly well. You know, he's got a diffusion line. He really knows what he's doing, and that's interesting. And he also knows that as a fashion designer, actually designing fashion is only part of the job.
Let's talk a little bit about the Hugo Boss appointment. What do you think of that? Is it a smart move for Hugo Boss? Are you excited to see what he does there?
Well, it doesn't really have a fashion identity at the moment, I think. You know, it exists and they have clothes and they're very nice and they sell very well, but I think in terms of kind of an editorial impact, they don't have that. They don't really have an enormous identity. I think that's probably what this is part of. It's appointing a designer, and actually it's going against sort of the general trend that we've had of people who've worked with design, you know, people from the design studio being appointed to major positions at different houses. It seems to be sort of bucking against that trend to appoint somebody that is high profile and is very visible. And obviously there's a strategy, and the strategy is probably that they want to expand in America. So it's interesting, and I'm interested to see what he does. And also I think because Jason's clothes are incredibly feminine, and you don't really think of Hugo Boss as kind of a feminine brand.
No.
So I'm quite interested as to how that sort of marriage of opposites is going to work.
We've talked a little bit about Jason. Obviously, we'll come back to him when the show starts. But I do, as it's our first panel of the season and it's the start of New York Fashion Week, I'd like to talk a little bit about New York this season. There's some exciting stuff that's gone on. Today, you know, there was the news of the investment in Alexandra's business. What do you guys think of that? Is that brilliant to see another young designer championed?
I'd heard rumours about it, and
You're ahead of the...
but I love Alexandra. I've always loved what he's done.
What do you like so much about Alexandra?
It's a very specific point of view. It's actually quite a European point of view, so maybe that's why I like it. And to be honest, the whole of the last collection was leatherette and mink, which is very me. I thought there was something...
There was some fringing as well.
I like him because he's not afraid to kind of challenge our perceptions of taste. You know, the last collection there was a leatherette dress lined in mink, which I was just like, is like kind of Merritt Oppenheim's fur teacup or something. You know, it almost became this weird surrealist object. It was so horrendously bad that it came back round to being fantastic. And I think there's lots of moments like that in his collections.
And that is quite European, as you say.
But I just think it's that he's very provocative and he's challenging, and his clothes have such incredible impact, and there's for such a specific taste. I like that it's very balls to the wall. It's like he doesn't care really if people are buying it. It's not about appealing to the lowest common denominator. It's about doing something that he really believes in. He really believes in this sort of 80s bitch power woman, big shoulders, high heels, which is very much my taste at any time. But I think he does everything with such conviction. And I think it's really great to see someone investing in something like that, because it's not a guaranteed return. Yeah. It's not like he's doing a line of t-shirts that everyone's buying. He's making incredibly complicated, incredibly expensive clothes. It's an investment in design rather than an investment in finance. So yeah, I find that really exciting.
Would you agree with everything Alex said? Are you excited by it?
Everything I said. I talked way too much.
No, I also agree with what he said. I think whenever there's somebody who's doing something a little bit different and cool and is young, and you've got a major investor sitting up and take notice, I think whether they're in New York or in London, it just makes you feel a little bit warm inside. You're like, you know, there are people who are doing what they want, and it isn't all just about commerciability and people just buying things. That kind of shows that people can just, do something for their art, and it be accepted.
It's just good. Out of New York as well, it's a really nice symbol,
which is rare.
Another thing that I want to talk about with New York is, and it ties again with Alcazar, is the smaller shows thing, because obviously Susie Menkes with that amazing piece about the circus of fashion, and then we are seeing designers doing smaller shows. So the most famous example of that is Oscar de la Renta, who's really cutting his show this season. What do we think about the way in which New York is as a fashion city, and the way in which it sort of begins Fashion Month? Because obviously it's very long, the schedule's incredibly taxing. You know, Eric Wilson wrote a piece where he said that just no one seems to be looking forward to it, no one wants to go, it's a bit haphazard, everyone hates the tents. Are we going to see, is this going to be a point where we're seeing a change in fashion, whether that's digital shows, whether that's smaller shows? Would you guys welcome that? Are you even looking forward to going to Fashion Month? I guess that's what I'm asking.
It's so long, and even Corinne Whitefeld said to me last week that it's a month and it's too long, and it's really, really expensive to send teams out for the whole, you know, we're a small magazine, we're a British magazine. I've got colleagues who have gone to New York. I can't go to New York. I've got other things to do in the office, but for everybody to be everywhere from today until the 3rd of October is a huge investment when you've still got daily things to do, like put out newspapers and weekly magazines. I don't know if it is time. It feels like everybody's starting to sort of moan a lot more about it and get a bit more vocal about it. So maybe somewhere, someone will have a bit of a sea change and be like, we have to do something about this.
Because I guess it's not just the time commitment, it's also the pace of fashion seems really bizarre in terms of now everything's seen digitally. It just seems out of sync. You know, we used to go for the reason that journalists and press would see it before everyone else, but now everyone sees it at the same time and you can't buy it for sort of 6 months. Are we going to see a change? Would you welcome that, Tom?
Yes. I think it's, I think the circus nature of a season, a show, is still exciting. It's still, you know, we all probably have friends that we see twice a year at shows, you know, and that's really nice, the circus of it. But it seems kind of counterproductive now. I think we'll go back to the days of just designers making something nice and showing it to an editor and then stocking it within a week. I think that'd be more exciting. And as you say, I mean, loads of people are making decent amounts of money on resort collections, and what is spring, summer, what is autumn, winter? There isn't any rules, you know. They'll be showing fur coats this week, you know. I'd welcome a change. I think it'd be more exciting.
Alex, what's your take on it? Is there any value to half of these people at the show?
Well, there is. I think the fashion show will always exist in the same way that, despite vinyl and tapes and CDs and MP3s, the live concert still exists, because there is that engagement in a live event. There's this idea of going and witnessing something.
But that's for everyone.
That's important. No, but I think there's something very different to going and being part of it than going and, you know, you have to pay a lot of money to go and see Dolly Parton. It's not, you know, it's kind of, but the other thing that often gets lost in discussion of the international collections is that it's a trade show. It's a really big, really expensive, really fancy trade show. It's like the Ideal Home Show, the Birmingham NEC or something. You know, really, that's what it is. And you kind of, people forget about that. It is really, it does serve a business purpose. You're going, it's like a convention. You go, you have things presented to you, and then you buy from them.
I guess that's what I'm asking. Have we lost a bit of that business purpose? Because I do agree, and you can't really argue that it does have a business purpose, but then when you see the fashion show outside the fashion show, is that the industry kind of dumbing itself down in some way? I don't know how you feel about that. Do you feel a pressure to, you know, kind of dress up for the shows? And
I think on a practical level, when I'm not shooting or scrabbling around on my knees in the fashion cupboard looking for lost shoes, not that we ever lose anything in our fashion cupboard, you have to be very practical. And when I'm going around the shows in lovely cities and going to sit down, watch a show, get in a car, go and sit down somewhere else, go and sit down for a nice lunch, and I can wear a nice pair of heels and a nice dress and not have to wear the practical things. But there are so many people who do just dress up to be seen. I don't know if the kind of the speed of what's happening and the kind of the circus aspect is because when online started, people started seeing it, people who weren't within the traditional trade little area, and then started trying to make it their own, which lost the true sense of it is an industry. This is for business people who run businesses that happen to be very pretty and sparkly and exciting and glamorous, but it is a business.
That's interesting when you mentioned, you know, that kind of the entertainment factor of fashion, because would you say, I guess this is a question to both at the indie and at Stylist, would you say that your readers actually now take an interest in what people at the shows were wearing and that kind of aspect of it, as well as the fashion actually on the catwalk? Do you think the street style thing is actually what's engaging people a lot more in fashion than just what's on the runway?
I think they like to take tips from how people are wearing things. So they wouldn't want to do it themselves, but they might think, oh, well, maybe I could wear that kind of printed t-shirt and a jacket with a print as well. So little aspects, but we very, very rarely do street style because there are so many other things to cover in fashion.
And there are so many other people doing it as well. I think that's it. But I do think there's this weird thing that people that dress up to go to the shows have been kind of villainized, and it is sometimes irritating when you see people that are preening and where that's all that they've gone for, and there are quite a lot of people that do that. But at the same time, I think being part of the fashion industry, you like fashion. You know, I hope you do. I think there's a lot of people that actually don't, but you like fashion. You like clothes. You like buying clothes. You like dressing. You know, it's what you love, and so the opportunity to dress up and also to wear something ludicrous that you probably couldn't wear otherwise, because you're going into this kind of safe, nice environment, and a builder isn't going to throw something at you. You know, there is that idea, and also the idea of kind of not impressing, but it's almost being able to display what you have. It's not a display of wealth, but it's more kind of, you know,
in the know.
exactly. It's this idea,
I
you
like
know
it,
this, you know that, you know, which sounds really kind of pretentious and horrible, but it's like Trekkies. Trekkies go into a convention and they dress up in their Star Trek uniforms, and that I keep talking about the collections as a convention, but it is, you know, it's
Comic-Con of fashion.
But it's the fact that everybody's all around and they all work in the same industry, and so you are kind of with like minds, which I think encourages people to dress up.
I'm really interested you say with like minds, because that seems like a telling phrase given the piece that Susie wrote, because the implication of what Susie Menker said was kind of that it's not about like minds anymore. You have the people that go and do what we're talking about, which is the business side. They go because they have to, they go because they need to report on it or buy it, and then you have the people that go and just sit there on their phones the whole time and stand outside and go maybe without even a ticket. Is that does that bother you at all? Is that a problem? Do you find that annoying, Tom? I guess in London that's quite a big part.
But I think the industry sort of facilitated that kind of looky-loo, everyone come and join in. This isn't, you know, it is a trade show, except I think the fashion industry as a global industry has sort of said to the reader in the papers or the fan, no, but you can be part of it. You know, please come and join in. So then it's a bit weird to then, there's a weird kind of double standard there where we're saying come in, but then we're saying, oh, it's kind of annoying that you're here now, you know, because they love it, you know. At Summer's House, it's all about these kids dressing up at 18, and the organisers love it.
Most they used to be, they're now bloggers. Before they'd be students, and they'd be trying to get in because they're fashion students and they love it. Now, I mean, if I was 10 years younger, I'd probably have a blog and be kind of like, oh my God, I'm going to see the show. I'm wearing something silly.
It's just a way to enter into the fashion industry a new way, I guess. And
I never encouraged them. I never encouraged them, and I never ever gatecrashed a show, ever.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah, I never even
missed out, Alex.
I never even dreamed of doing it. I wouldn't go to something I wasn't invited to.
Oh.
But that's just me being weird.
You were brought up proper.
Yeah,
That's why.
Northern.
That really surprises me. I thought you would have been...
No.
But you were politely covering them from home though, weren't you?
Yeah, not politely. I was being really horrible about everything, yeah.
You were polite and not going. You were just a voyeur.
Yeah.
The show looks like it's about to start, so let's go back a little bit onto Jason. I want to talk a little bit about his aesthetic and how that's developed over the course of his career. Alex, how would you said it was kind of relatively feminine, and people throw around the term kind of princessy and even girly at some point with his collections. We've seen that change a little bit in recent seasons, but how would you sort of explain what he does?
I mean, I think with Jason there's a massive focus on evening wear. That's very much what's seen as one of his signatures, is this evening cocktail thing. I think it's interesting looking at the development of his career and seeing the sophistication increase, and obviously as he's making more money and he's able to, which is the great thing about making money in fashion, is that he can push it. He can have special fabrics woven, he can have special embroideries made, you know, he can really push the technique in what he's doing and do something, you know, unique and really incredible. He makes his own shoes, he does his own handbags, and now he's started to do his own advertising campaigns as well, which it's all about that, being able to kind of control elements and being able to push it higher and higher. It's interesting to see him do that, to see him kind of the increasing levels of sophistication, and also the fact that there is the focus on evening wear, but he is aware that there are women that come to him to buy day wear, that he can offer them a full wardrobe now, which is very interesting, I think.
So is what's most interesting about Jason then the way he's developed his brand and the way he's grown his, I would like to say business, maybe the brand I guess is the right word for this, the way he's grown his brand rather than the actual fashion or aesthetic that he's putting out?
Well, I think his clothes are very polite. I would say they're very polite, they're very ladylike, and they are in that vein of, you know, Carolina Herrera, Oscar de la Renta, Caroline Rome. Like it's very much this kind of thread that has always been there in New York fashion particularly, and that it's the same women buying it as well, which is the women that bought Oscar de la Renta in the 60s are buying Jason Wood today, you know, now they're in their 60s. So I think there's something very interesting about that, because it does suggest that obviously there's an enormous market for it, for dressing these kind of Manhattan matriarchs. You know, I think there's something very interesting in that, in the fact that the same Jason would dress could conceivably be worn by a 16-year-old girl and by a 60-year-old woman.
Would you agree with that, Alex?
Yeah, I'm thinking about their daughters. They could both go into the store, and mummy could buy something fabulous, and so could the daughter.
And that's quite American, that concept as well, that kind of prom kind of...
Yes, but chic, polished, faultless elegance. I think for winter there was something a little bit sexier about it, a little bit harder, but nothing that was ever going to scare anybody. And that you would wear it and you would look fabulous. And everybody would be like, oh my God, your dress is beautiful. It is, yes.
I think it is a bit, actually, if we're talking about general development, it is a bit sexy now.
Yeah.
His pre-fall collection was inspired by Antonio Lopez and Jerry Holland and kind of the Lopez girls. And it had a lot more sensuality. He did a collection inspired by Newton for last spring. So I think there's that interesting thread that he is trying to push himself and do something kind of sexier. And something, I guess, that appeals to a different woman.
And do you think it'll be interesting, perhaps something we'll see out of him having this position at Hugo Boss, is that he'll be able to use his own line to be perhaps even a little bit more experimental? Or do you think that one of the things he's always going to do is kind of be incredibly focused on what his core identity is?
Does sound like quite a focused kind of guy in the way that he's set everything up, and even when, if you look at what he did at school and how he started out on his career, it sounds like he's got, this is what I'm doing, this is my life, he's on a path. So I don't know if I don't think personality-wise it seems like he'll be like, oh, well, okay, I'll do that there, and I'll just do something crazy here, because I can, it's my own line.
Too precious to him for that. Looks like the show's going to start. It's got incredible production as well. It looks absolutely beautiful with the lighting. What are you expecting to see, Tom?
One-shouldered ball gowns with a bit of, a high cut for spring. Would be fine.
That's a cruel question, because if that's the complete opposite, then what comes out of me?
First look.
Yeah, now I just say hoodies and sweatpants.
Oyster satin sheath dresses.
Longest pause in the world.
Might not be starting.
Let's hope it's starting. Okay, I'll ask
it's a false start.
It's a false start.
The venue's quite great. I'm trying to work out if that's real or a projection.
I think he's showing he's not showing in the tents, obviously. I think he's showing at 82 Mercer Street.
Yeah, Mercer Street Studios.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about who on this New York schedule is going to stand out, because we mentioned Marc Jacobs at the start. Who else is going to be the kind of smash hits of this season? Who are you looking for? Alex? Fury?
Oh, it's starting.
Oh, it's starting.
Off the hook.
I see shoulder.
And that's kind of almost Oyster, isn't it?
Yeah, we were right. The theme for the collection is a dialogue between construction and ease.
Oh, I did email him and tell him to tell me what it was about, but he didn't.
He's very busy.
Oh, it's Karen Elson.
Yeah. So what are our first thoughts? That's, again, it's quite a sexy, sort of striking opening look. We were talking about how his stuff is getting more sensual.
It's quite 90s. It's very 90s Tom Ford for Gucci.
Does that please you though, Alex?
It's a comment. I don't know if it pleases me yet. But yeah, it's very that 90s, 98, 99.
Big cuff around the ankle. That's it, isn't it?
Very now, that, isn't it? I'm not enjoying those poles though, because I keep thinking one of the models is going to catch a foot on them. I'm very interested by the fact that you said, before we actually saw the show, Alex, this idea of clothes for a girl of a certain age, and then Alex, you said about, clothes for a mother and then for a daughter, because this seems a very savvy collection in that respect. We've seen a lot of very wearable pieces that, you know, cover arms and are very accommodating, but then also some of the looks that could be worn by much younger women.
So if I lived in Dallas and went shopping with my mother, who had big bouffant blonde hair, which she absolutely doesn't, she would probably buy that and wear something, and then I'd wear the, this is me in a whole other life, buy the first look, little sequin dress to go to some fabulous party, and she'd wear that at her lunch dates with her girlfriends.
Tom, are you excited by this?
Am I excited? I'm not, you know, I'm not overwhelmed. I mean, it is what it is, and I think there is a huge demographic of ladies who they're loving it as we speak, very much. I'm not running around town in one of his frocks, but you know.
You should.
Well, you know.
See, that would be interesting, rather than the uptown princess.
But I do think this is sexy. I think it's very, it reminds me actually, you know when Victoria Beckham, I think it was last spring, summer, she did that collection that felt totally different, and it had all
the very flat shoes.
Very flat shoes. It was when she first worked with Manona, she did all that tomato red and that white. It reminds me kind of that, there's a freshness to it, but it feels quite sexy and quite young.
I think that's where we're going. I think the days of loud digital print are going behind us, and I think it is getting back to whites and modernity. He's yet to really leave behind the sequin vibes, but that's very much him.
But I think the sequins in this collection felt a little fresh. As Alex said, they felt 90s. It didn't feel so kind of prom-like as other... Alex, tell me a little bit about what this says about the way that women are dressing, because obviously your target market is stylish, intelligent women. Some of the kind of sexy zones that we're seeing in this, you know, you mentioned the wide cuff around the ankle, we're seeing a lot of backs. What does this say about the way in which women want to sort of present themselves and dress now?
I think I'm a little bit more interested in the way he's got the opaque and the translucent, and the lighter fabrics just feel a little bit easier. So I think they're more important rather than just a sexy dress, because you've got a bit of a play of something going on, but it's not as obvious. It just feels easy chic. No, it's no-brainer.
Is that kind of a priority for you? Do you find that, because obviously it's working women who...
Yeah, they're really busy, and they just want, I don't know what they look in the magazine, whether we're talking about galleries or restaurants or fashion, they just want to know, what can I get? We do all the sort of the editing for them. So there's so many different occasions. They want things that they can just go off and buy now and not have to think about, know that they're going to look good in it, know that they're going to look on trend, know that it's a bit of a designer with a bit of cachet that they could talk about, and somebody would be like, oh, is that a so-and-so? And they're like, yeah, I read about it in Stylist. So it's kind of taking away the hard work for them from kind of shopping.
So would a collection of this kind appeal to them? Is this something that, does this feel kind of modern and relevant to you? You know, you mentioned that you're very engaged with what's going on in London, and those are the kind of designers you enjoy covering, but looking at this, is there something that seems sort of exciting and fashion forward? I hate that phrase, but to this about for you?
I think it's exciting in that it's New York and it's the first show of the season, and there are pieces that could totally easily be worn instantly, and I think that's probably something that isn't a cool thing, but it's quite nice to have that.
Alex, Fury, what's your take? How's this a step forward for Jason? Is it a step forward? What's the story of this collection and his...
I'm interested in, it's much more, there's much more a sense of the body, I think, than we've seen in a lot of his clothes in the past. You know, it is very sensual. It's kind of windows open onto the skin, physical windows of opacity. That idea, you can really see the movement of the body underneath the garments, which is very interesting. There's a lightness, and it feels kind of, it does feel youthful. It feels maybe younger than some of his collections have in the past. I'm also really interested in the longer length, but at the same time it doesn't feel matronly. The fact that actually these skirts are incredibly long for day wear. They're, you know, lower mid-calf.
Yeah, that look with the sequin lower mid-calf with the sweater over
Exactly,
it.
which felt, I mean, that felt like a really kind of modern, easy way, a very American kind of sportswear way to dress for cocktail, or to dress for evening. No. But also I think the mid-calf length skirts are really, it's interesting, and it's quite a statement as well. There've been the shorts, but there hasn't been a short dress. So it seems like he's very much about that elongated line, which is interesting. There's also, I think, quite a lot of sort of utility touches, which really isn't something you think of with Jason Wu. There's safari jackets, jumpsuits. Here's a short dress to totally contradict what I just said. But you know, I think it's really interesting. He's playing with a lot of things that he hasn't explored before, and again, it feels like there is a bit of risk taking here.
Does this feel like a confident collection to you, Tom?
Yeah, I think he does know exactly what he's doing. And I think I'm not down his taste level. I think his taste level is there completely as well. It's a collection that is morning to evening. You know, he's got a specific woman in mind. He'll know them personally. They'll be friends of his, clients of his who's built up. He knows exactly what he's doing.
I'm interested because we talk about New York often. I think everyone in the fashion industry does this. They talk about the four cities like they're completely alien to each other. But I look at some of the looks in this runway. The look Alex and I mentioned, you know, that longer skirt with the jumper, and I think that wouldn't actually look out of place on an established.
It's a styling thing, though. Yeah. From this show would be styled completely differently, maybe I would say in London. From a stylistic point of view, you know, this is a gorgeous little dress, but maybe we'd throw something else on top. You know. That's very 90s, huh?
I love that biker look over the sequin dress. That feels clean. Carly looks incredible.
Doing the panther.
I know.
I do wonder if this is sort of a bit of Charles James that everyone's going to be doing come next season for the Met.
Yeah, talk to us.
Which is exciting.
Yeah,
which
talk a
is
little bit about
obviously
that.
the most exciting thing to happen all year for me after La Croix. I mean, you know, we talk about American design, and you talk about it being commercial, and you talk about it not being, you know, not being as inventive as European design, and then you have someone like Charles James, who's, you know, one of the three greatest designers of the 20th century, I think. And his approach is incredibly American, you know, but it's more that kind of Chrysler, it's that engineering approach, which is what's fantastic about him. And the other thing that I actually love about the Met doing a show on Charles James is that the label doesn't exist anymore. People don't really know who Charles James is. It's not about crowd pleasing, it's really about pleasing quite a hardcore group of fans of Charles James, I think. And also about introducing it to a younger generation and to a new audience. And it's interesting, especially with the Met. I think it has this duty to educate people. And I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost, but it's great that I think with Charles James it's really about introducing people to something that they've never been aware of before. It's the same thing with the punk exhibition. I think what that actually did was expose a lot of people to make connections that they wouldn't have immediately made. It's the same with Prada and Schiaparelli. You wouldn't have immediately made those connections, but Andrew Bolton taught you through it, and then you understood exactly what they meant and how there was a kind of a conversation between those two designers. And I think it was the same with punk. It was really interesting to illustrate that conversation between the past and the present, and exactly how radical it was, and also how influential, and that it wasn't just safety pins to a dress. It's, you know, it's on so many different levels. I think that's something the Met does really well, and yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly excited to see it. I think it's, you know, he's someone that isn't known nearly enough, and also I'm quite excited to see all the designers do Charles James ball gowns.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's going to be amazing.
The glee when you saw Carly come out of it.
It's going to be great.
So as we see this final walkthrough, let's talk a little bit about the collection. Alex, you mentioned you were surprised by some of the more utility type sort of pieces. What's our takeaway from this? If we had to sort of sum it up or summarise, I don't think any of us were surprised by what we saw. I think, as Alex said, there were elements that perhaps felt fresh, but I don't think we were shocked by anything.
It wasn't shocking, but I was surprised. I think it did feel like quite a move away from what he's established as his signature. I think those two dresses at the end are very kind of Jason Wu, very much what he's known for. But it was interesting to see him translate maybe more abstract elements of his style, you know, the embroidery, the soft fabrics, that kind of femininity, and to translate those into different shapes, different garments. The idea of him doing a biker jacket is quite revolutionary. So yeah, no, I think it really felt like he was pushing himself out of his comfort zone.
He's so cute.
He is very sweet.
What interested you about the collection, Alex?
I just think it's ease, just the fact that you could just throw it on and not worry at all about what you're wearing in it, which is, I guess that it is a little bit less structured. I think of him a lot with lace previously, but it was just, yeah, throw it on and ease.
I guess that ease almost does feel a little bit, not surprising, but it feels like a step forward, because we all said before about that hyper-femininity and that kind of elegance and princessness that he sometimes does feel a little bit stiff sometimes, you know, like the hairbands, the bows, and that kind of, that slouchy biker and that jumper, that feels relevant. It feels a bit sort of cooler and
much less prissy. Especially for a London audience, or I don't know, somebody that's a bit more European. I think Americans do have a reputation for being quite uptight and very proper. You can't be topless on a beach, and that sits with it previously. So now this is a bit lighter, fresher, younger.
But I think as well it was interesting that actually it's very American as well. It was very Calvin Klein, Donna Karan, Tom Ford. You know, it was very much that mid-90s school of kind of looks, American minimalism. Michael Kors, it was even a bit Michael Kors, that idea of, you know, kind of a sequined. The opening dress on Karen Elson was actually an elongated sequin vest. When you look at it, you know, it had that kind of...
The halter.
Exactly. So there's something quite interesting, I think, in that, and again in that awareness of kind of an American design heritage, and really that's sort of what New York fashion is. It's that kind of thing. You have that, and you have Oscar de la Renta. And then you have the kind of the mavericks that you've had coming up in the last 10 years, I guess. But for so long, that is what New York fashion represented. So it's quite interesting that he's going back almost this archetype of New York style.
But given he's talked very much, especially recently with the Hugo Boss thing and the Lancôme beauty range, he's talked very much about how his brand is seen by the world. It seems quite sensible in a way to draw on that American...
Yeah, I think the world see you as an American designer. And if they're buying you, they want to buy something American. They're not going to try and buy something that looks Italian from you.
But is this idea of New York changing a little bit? I guess that's what I was talking about a little bit at the start when I mentioned, you know, Creatures of the Wind and some of the younger designers. Is New York's identity becoming a bit more of a melting pot in the way that London is?
I was going to say I think they all are. I think, you know, I think Milan doesn't feel quite as, you know, bastard tits and arse as it used to. Although I quite like it, it's spring, they'll do it very well. And New York doesn't feel, you know, in the 90s when I started, I remember when I first started to be interested in fashion, it was, you know, Milan was sexy and London, no one had any money and made everything out of bin bags, and New York you didn't bother looking at. New York jumped itself. I always remember, because New York used to be at the end, I think McQueen showed fishtail skirts and Calvin Klein released a picture. For spring 97, he released a picture in advance of his collection to prove that he hadn't copied Alexander McQueen's fishtail skirts. Being like, I did them, they're here. Because I think there is that kind of, there was that concern that New York was seen as this commercial juggernaut that just kind of chomped up everybody else's ideas and churned out, you know, slick versions of them. But I think that's totally been overturned in the last 10 years. There's now this kind of this flurry of new New York designers that you are interested to see and that you are excited by, and that are making kind of innovative, experimental, interesting clothes. And even some of the old ones, I think, are now much more interesting than they used to be. I mean, Calvin Klein's fantastic.
So you mentioned some of the kind of mavericks. Tom, who are you excited to see on New York? Because there must be some of the designers who are...
Yeah, but I mean, I look to New York not with the eyes of someone who's going to discover something new and young. Maybe I should be. I look to see how these incredibly confident American designers are planning empires, which I think is really interesting. So I'll always see what Mark's doing because he has such an identity, knows exactly what he's doing. I think Wang is consciously following in Mark's footsteps with a completely different aesthetic, but as the idea of building a new brand of a global nature, which he's very much aiming to do, I think is interesting. And I'd also, Wang's a bit more up my street aesthetically-ish. Yeah.
What about Proenza and some of the younger crowd?
Proenza, Rodarte, they feel like, and Alex Wang, they're the cool people who you go to New York to see. So there's, it's so easy just to lump them in the old guard and the new.
But even when we're talking about the new guard, these are like 10-year-old designers now, aren't they? Rodarte, Proenza, like, you know, we're not talking about last year's hot new thing. We're talking about, these are established people with shops and brands. So that's what I mean about how I'm not, no one's telling me to consciously go looking there for newness. Because if Rodarte is considered new, that's confusing for me. I think they're great, and I get their vision completely, but that's a 10-year-old brand still, and it's a brand. That's not some kid making shit in their kitchen, which I sort of like a bit of.
But I guess Jason sits quite nicely between the old and the new guard because he's 7 years his brand's been going, so you could lump it alongside Rodarte, Proenza, the younger ones, but then the aesthetic, as Alex mentioned, fits with the old, you know, Oscar de la Renta. Maybe that's why he's a perfect one to start New York with.
Yeah, it's the new establishment.
But still establishment, you know, is the thing.
Deep. Well, let's sum up on that note because it's a nice way to sort of ease ourselves into New York Fashion Week. So thank you very much. Wonderful panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.